Brother Shahid. Um, how does the US violate the principles of the United Nations Charter in their own country?
Oh well, I mean, if you look at some of the statistics on human rights and civil rights violations, if you look at some of the statistics on violence, if you look at the statistics on brutality by the security forces in the United States, if you even look at statistics on mortality rates, if you look at statistics on homelessness and poverty, if you look at statistics, believe it or not, if you look at statistics on hunger in the United States, if those same statistics were coming out of another country, why you would see the United States uh, uh, going to town at the United Nations, calling for a condemnation of that country. You would see them calling for sanctions against that country. You would see them passing resolutions against that country for all of the ways that they're oppressing their people, the ways that they're unjust against their own population, the crimes and the violations that they're committing against their own citizens. If the same statistics that exist in the United States were coming out of, say, North Korea, or were coming out of China, or coming out of Pakistan or somewhere else, the United States wouldn't finish talking about how bad that country is, and how unjust that country is, and how tyrannical that country is. And they would say this, that, and the other thing about that country, and how the world needs to come together to liberate and free that country from the tyrannical government that they're suffering from. If the same statistics that are actually coming out of the United States were coming out of another country, that's what you would see. So, for example, I think you have 1,200 people, 1,200 people killed every year in the United States by gun violence. You had just last year, you had over 650 mass shootings in the United States. I think something like 75% of all violent crimes, gun violence, in the entire hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, is perpetrated by guns coming from the United States. So they are purveyors of violence, they're purveyors of carnage and bloodshed, not only against the countries in the global South, not only the countries in the Western Hemisphere, Central, Latin America, and so forth, but in their own country. They're not protecting their own people. They're arming their own people against their own people, and they're not protecting them. And not only are they not protecting them, but the people who are charged with protecting them, the security forces, perpetrate violence against their own population at a remarkable rate. We see cases of police shootings, what they call police shootings, but which, again, if it was occurring in any other country, it would be referred to as extrajudicial killing by the security forces. Well, that happens every day in the United States. And as we know, and as the statistics show, the extrajudicial killings by the security forces in America are disproportionately targeting so-called minority communities, the African American community, the Latino community, the Native American community, and so forth, as well as obviously the underclass overall, the poorer people overall. So you could actually argue, and again, it would be argued by the United States, if this was happening in another country, it would be argued that this is a form of ethnic cleansing, because this is a systematic targeting of so-called minority communities with violence, not to mention with other with things like drugs, which we also know through investigative reports from, especially about the crack epidemic that happened in the 1980s, that was actually engineered by the U.S. government. It was actually engineered by the CIA and the FBI to spread cheap drugs. It was a connection between the American intelligence community and the cartels in South America to spread drugs in minority communities. And then once you've spread the drugs in those communities, then you arrest them. Not only do you spread the violence and the addiction, but then you also send your security forces to go and arrest people. And that's why the United States has, even though they're only about 3% of the global population on Earth, their prisoners constitute 25% of all incarcerated people on the planet. 25% of all prisoners on Earth are in the United States and are American citizens. Well, how can you tell me that that's not a form of ethnic cleansing, that's not a form of injustice and oppression being committed by the United States systematically against its own people. They have every right that the United Nations should intervene. The United Nations should be able to intervene against the United States itself for the rampant human rights and civil rights violations that they're committing on a daily basis against their own population, against their own citizens. It's absolutely remarkable, and it's outrageous that the U.S. is able to get away with what it gets away with within its own borders. If you add up the total number of people, the victims of American violations of human rights, of civil rights, of international law that they commit against their own citizens in their own country domestically, if you just add up the number of their victims, including the dead, the wounded, the incarcerated, it would be more than enough to show persistent violations of the UN, of the principles of the UN Charter. But when you add to that their international crimes, it's absolutely breathtaking. During the Iraq War, the average number of American or Western coalition soldiers who died daily was between 1 and 2 on a daily basis. Between 1 and 2 American or Western coalition soldiers died during the Iraq War. They died just 1 or 2 every day. 100 times that dies in the United States on a daily basis. It's safer for you to go to a war zone than for you to live in America. It's safer, and those soldiers all come back with PTSD. Well, what do you think the average American citizen is suffering? The average American citizen is suffering 100 times the level of violence and the level of danger and the threat to their life, 100 times greater than if they were in an occupied war zone in Iraq. The average American civilian is in greater danger than if they had joined the army and gone off to fight in a foreign country in a war zone. The same way that the United Nations is forced to look the other way when America commits war crimes all around the world, when they commit crimes against humanity all around the world, the same way that the UN is forced to look the other way when they do that, they're also forced to look the other way at what's going on right outside the office, the headquarters of the United Nations, right outside on the streets of New York. The United Nations, everyone who works at the United Nations, who lives in New York, knows what's going on. They know what the situation is in that country. They know how violent it is. They know how dangerous it is. They know how actually oppressive and tyrannical it is. But they have to look the other way there too. They have to look the other way at what America is doing to Americans, what the American government is doing to their own citizens. They have to look the other way, the same way that they have to look the other way in Congo, the same way that they have to look the other way in Iraq, the same way that they have to look the other way in Afghanistan, the same way that they have to look the other way in Yemen, the same way that they have to look the other way in Libya. They also have to look the other way in New York. They have to look the other way in Detroit. They have to look the other way in Chicago. They have to look the other way in California, in Texas, in New Mexico, in all of the violent places, in all of the most violent places in America. The United Nations has to look the other way. But they have the power and they have the mandate to do something about it. But the thing that is forcing them to look the other way is the presence of the United States in the United Nations, which allows them to dominate it, which allows them to dominate on the Security Council, which allows them to dominate the agenda and the management and the policies and the approach, and everything that the United Nations is allowed to do is determined by the United States. One of the reasons is because of the funding, and one of the reasons is because of the history of their funding, which gave them, as I said from the beginning, they started from a position of advantage. And they grew the system around the advantage that they had from the establishment of the United Nations. But there is something that can be done about it. Alhamdulillah, there is something that can be done about it. And the thing that is preventing the United Nations from actually addressing the violence and conflict that the United States is responsible for, again, not only around the world, but that the United States is responsible for against their own citizens, the United Nations can do something about it if they are freed and liberated from the domination of that institution by America. And that's something that we can achieve, we can accomplish. Selma mentioned something with regards to the funding, and it's a very important distinction. When you say that the United States is the largest funder, She said it's not the largest funder. And that's correct, because who is the largest funder? Literally everyone else. The combination of all of the other member states are the largest funder. If America funds roughly 22% or even say 25%, okay, that means that the rest of the world is responsible for 75% of the budget. The rest of the world has the power. America doesn't have the power. And the same way, the rest of the world can come together and invoke Article 6 and get the United States expelled from the United Nations for the persistent violations of the principles of the Charter. That's something that can absolutely happen. And if someone doesn't believe it can happen, it's because you are yourself a victim of the psychological corruption of American domination, where they have normalized might makes right, and they've normalized that you can buy your way out of justice. That's the only reason that you would believe that, because especially now, at this particular time in 2024, America doesn't have the relative power that it had in 1945. It's not the same world that it was then. The world has changed, and other countries around the world have grown in their power, have grown in their influence, and are steadily, day by day, growing in their independence and their defiance of American colonization and American imperialism. So this is absolutely something that can happen. So even if you have a doubt, even if you have been psychologically colonized, if you've been psychologically corrupted by the power of the United States and the way that they've dominated the globe so far, that in and of itself is a reason why you should click on the link in Iman's bio or in the bio of any of us who are speaking. Click on that link and go to the petition and sign the petition and share the petition, because that's going to be the first step for you to liberate your own self from the psychological colonization and the psychological corruption that has been inflicted upon you. Because there's no question whether or not this can be done. There's no question about whether or not it can be accomplished. Because if you even question that, then look at what you're questioning. You're literally questioning, is it possible for rules to be followed? Is it possible that the United States can actually be held to account for what it signed? Is it possible that the contract that they signed can be fulfilled, can be upheld? Is it possible that rules have to be upheld? What kind of a question is that? The fact that you even question the possibility of the rules being followed shows the extent to which your own mind has been corrupted, and how much the domination of the United States has normalized the idea that might makes right, and that you can buy your way out of justice. So you need to do something about that to cure yourself and to heal yourself from that psychological corruption. And go to the link, sign the petition, and share it with your friends and family. And we will make this happen, inshallah, bi'idhnillah.